This presentation is Resilient Landscapes, Fire Mitigation for the Future of the Wasatch Mountains. So let's give a big hand to our presenters.
All right, I am Spencer Shaver, and I have the pleasure of talking to you today about how we create resilient landscapes and how fire mitigation can be used to better prepare the Wasatch Mountains for the future. With me today are Laura Briefer, Director of Public Utilities at Salt Lake, Stuart Bedke, a Zones Fuel Specialist at the U.S. Forest Service, and Robby Edgel, Habitat Restoration Biologist from the Utah DNR. I want to use my time today with you all to introduce a project we're undertaking in the central Wasatch to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire and speak some to the importance of this project to ensure Salt Lake City's drinking and culinary water are clean and accessible in the face of an increasingly fire-prone landscape. And this picture here is a burn pile in Mill Creek Canyon, which was cut this summer, then burned just a few weeks ago. I'll let Stu give more of a project update, but you can see how this project takes shape in places you know and love, and how it better prepares the landscape, private property, and important recreational areas for the increased risk we face from catastrophic wildfire. This project and our partnership are critical to both the treatment of the forested landscapes to reduce the risk of wildfire in the central Wasatch and communicating the need for proactive wildfire mitigation work. I want to thank the Salt Lake Department of Public Utilities, Utah DNR, and the Forest Service for the partnership and cooperation to address some of the drivers that lead the Wasatch Front being a high-risk area of wildfire. This high risk, particularly in watersheds which supply municipal water like Little and Big Cottonwood Canyons, can quickly impact water availability, water quality, and the infrastructure like treatment plants that we need to provide usable municipal water. So where exactly are we most at risk? I want to start by acknowledging that Utah is at the forefront of landscapes at risk of catastrophic wildfire. We're the second most arid state in the country, and collaborations like this one are critical to mitigating the risks, the risks associated with our climate and the conditions we find ourselves in today. The Wasatch Front and Central Wasatch Mountains are landscapes heavily used by private landowners, the recreating public, and private businesses like ski resorts, which rely on an interconnected ecosystem as the foundation of interests that bring us all to care about and have a stake in the future of the management of our canyons here. And everyone can see, breathe, and smell when wildfires originating here in Utah and across the West affect our air quality and will decrease air quality as a clear impact from these wildfires. You might not immediately understand why water quality and availability could be impacted as well. So here's a map of where in the Salt Lake Valley and Wasatch Mountains are just showing wildfire hazard potential, and you can see by the red, the bright red on this map, it indicates a very high wildfire hazard potential across the entirety of the Wasatch Front and much of the central Wasatch. Now you can see overlaid in the same areas that the risk to drinking watersheds in our population is also extreme, demonstrated by the red on the map here. So why are we so at risk? Some of the drivers of this extreme risk and very high hazard potential are drought, a changing climate, which leads to a progressively longer wildfire season, insect and disease outbreaks, land use change, and expansion into the WUI, which is development of the foothills, and the higher we develop the foothills, the more wildland-urban interface is prevalent in the Wasatch. And you can see by this graph here, it's a little small, but the average minimum daily temperatures for Salt Lake County, historically and predicted mid-century. And as you can see, in 9 years, Salt Lake County is expected to have 47 less days below freezing than we did in the past half century. This has a massive impact on wildfire risk and the increased heat, drought, and conditions which drive that risk. And here are just some of the impacts to the environment from catastrophic wildfire. First, the active management of fire, state, and federal agencies are undertaking today. Right away, after a wildfire, turbidity of surrounding water resources goes through the roof, and all that increased sedimentation and debris causes challenges for water treatment infrastructure, making treatment of water more difficult and more expensive. Not to mention the volatile organic carbons, VOCs, like benzene, or the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, which are toxic to both humans and wildlife, which follow a wildfire. Quicker runoff through the landscape affected by wildfire can lead to increased incidence of flooding and have an impact on snowpack. Following a wildfire, snow melts more quickly on average the following year. So I want to leave plenty of other time for other panelists and some questions. So I'll just share a few strategies we can use to reduce the risk we're facing. Shared stewardship agreements involving every agency with jurisdiction over the Wasatch. The wildfire won't care who the land manager is, the place where that wildfire is happening, and we should work across jurisdictional boundaries to address this problem. We do that by implementing fuels reduction strategies like burn piles or lap and scatter, which is important because it can be effective with hand tools, ideal for some of the wilderness areas that you'll encounter in the central Wasatch. Increased defensible space and infrastructure protection around homes and facilities can help reduce this risk, as well as community engagement and education, and just addressing the need for this type of fuels mitigation work. We have volunteer programs with the Forest Service that save our canyon, or you can help maintain trails by doing some of this engagement work. And certainly not least, watershed and habitat restoration efforts, which Robby will get into here in a second. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Laura Briefer. To you, Laura.
Thank you. I am Laura Briefer, and I am the Director of Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities. We are what's known as a public water supplier, defined under state and federal laws. And we operate a very vast network of infrastructure to get water to taps. That includes treatment plants, water transmission and distribution systems, and importantly, the watersheds that we divert that water from to reach the tap. As a public water system, we are required to meet a lot of regulatory requirements. We're very accountable for that, and that would be Safe Drinking Water Act requirements, both federal and state, as well as Clean Water Act requirements when we discharge water to receiving water bodies. So real quick, in the Salt Lake City service area, which includes not only Salt Lake City, but also portions of Mill Creek, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, and Murray, Midvale, and South Salt Lake, 141 square mile service area serving more than 365,000 people. Where does the drinking water to serve all those people in that large service area come from? Well, I'll say that on a typical year, about 90% of our water supply comes from natural forested areas. Those are areas that include City Creek Canyon, Parley's Canyon, Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood Canyon, and then we also receive water from Deer Creek Reservoir, which receives water from the Provo River system. So if you think about that land area, that watershed area, that really serves not only Salt Lake City's 365,000 people, but also much of the Wasatch Front, if you really think about it, in Utah County and Salt Lake County, a lot of that water comes from these forested watersheds. Now, we're not unique in Salt Lake City to rely on forested watersheds for water supply. Most people in the country actually receive their water that emanates from forested watersheds, much of it which is managed by the United States Forest Service. How do we ensure that water comes out of your tap in a way that's safe and reliable? Well, a large part of that is identifying and assessing risk to the continuity of those water supplies and the quality of those water supplies. My job, and I'm very passionate about it, and I'm very accountable for it, is to make sure that we do whatever it takes to not disrupt the public's access to clean, reliable, and affordable water supplies. So the risks that we generally assess when it comes to water supply, of course, is water quality. We need to meet the regulatory requirements to protect public health and the environment. Also, water quantity. Make sure that the supplies are adequate to meet demand without disruption, including as our population grows into the future. We also need to make sure we're adequately identifying and assessing the risks to our infrastructure. That includes our critical treatment plants, diversion structures, reservoirs, conveyance systems. All of those part of the built infrastructure depends upon or supports water quality and quantity. And then finally, we also assess risk in terms of operations. The water systems are operated from source to tap by my department and also by other water agencies in the region. And they're very dependent on other systems to function. So if you think about the power grid, or you think about transportation corridors or communications infrastructure, or the ability of our employees to operate the system, that operations risk assessment is also really important. And what are the key risk drivers to all of those parts of the system? Well, first and foremost, climate change, drought, storm intensification, and how do we address risk drivers? For that particular risk, we address through iterative climate vulnerability assessments and mitigation strategies. And I see Dr. Brooks here from University of Utah, who's helped us over the last few years on some of those vulnerability assessments related to climate, drought, and storm intensification. Another key risk driver, aging infrastructure. How do we manage that? We do a lot of in-depth asset planning and rehabilitation of aging infrastructure. And then finally, watershed degradation is another risk, primarily due to not only the climate drivers and drought drivers, but also due to human uses. And how do we manage that? We conduct watershed management planning, and we actually go out and on the ground manage those watersheds. And we've got a lot of our watershed management team here today. Can you raise your hands, watershed management team? Patrick. He's shy. So with all that context, how does the increased risk of wildfire impact our water supply? So the way I look at it, wildfire impact can, and Spencer kind of touched on this, it can in fact impact water quality. So it impacts the quality of that source water even before it gets to the treatment plant. And in some respects, both not just the wildfire itself, but the post-wildfire conditions can make it so that water can't even be treated to get to the public. Wildfire could also impact water quantity. And Spencer also touched on this a little bit too, but it can really change the hydraulics of a system. And over time can impact the quantity of the water that can make it to our distribution system and to your taps. Wildfire can also impact infrastructure. A lot of our water infrastructure is located along the urban wildland interface or even in the national forest itself. That includes treatment plants, it includes dams and reservoirs, diversion structures, pipelines, and actually one of my colleagues who runs the utility in Santa Rosa, California, after a major wildfire went through that community a few years ago, found that the heat of the wildfire actually impacted the distribution system pipes themselves. So there's a lot of risk to infrastructure. And then finally, wildfire can impact our operations. So all of those things that we need to do to get water to people's taps can be disrupted both in the event of a wildfire, that immediate event, and also in the aftermath. So what do we do to address wildfire risk? Well, first of all, as a water utility, I can't do anything to address wildfire risk on my own. I really need partnerships with folks like Save Our Canyons, the U.S. Forest Service, the state of Utah, Salt Lake County, and others. we all have a part to play in mitigating the risk and in responding to wildfire. And so that partnership is key. I think I will end there because there's like a 10-minute card that just flashed. And we can address questions at the end of this. So I'll turn it over to Robby. Oh, to you. Oh, there we go.
Hello, Stuart Bedke. I'm going to show a couple slides here real quick. So how do we manage this risk? First off, it's through shared stewardship agreements and partnerships. For those of you who haven't heard of Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative, Google Utah WRI, an amazing partnership. It's basically kind of a big umbrella with all the state, federal agencies involved, and we share resources, money, and skills and knowledge. So my job as a fuel specialist is basically to reduce the catastrophic fire potential for Salt Lake, Davis, and Tooele counties on Forest Service administered lands through defensible space infrastructure, as Laura mentioned. So we've created the partnership. We have over 14 organizations that have a regular day-to-day interaction with us, and then there's several more that we use on occasions. Prioritize the watershed. So we got with our partners and decided which watersheds are the priorities throughout those 3 counties. And then the Forest Service created what's called POD lines, potential operational delineation lines. These are lines, roads, rivers, ridges that we can use to help create an overall framework for the entire forest. So if there is a fire, we have predetermined lines that we can try and defend or catch the fire on. And then we do a comprehensive plan for those watersheds. So for right now, we have Parley's, Mill Creek Canyon, Big Cottonwood, and Little Cottonwood. Then we build the NEPA and we do the funding and the implementation, including managed fires. So especially for the wilderness areas, as we get natural starts, we're gonna look at the weather, current and expected, time of year. We take 12 different factors into consideration, and we decide if we're gonna go ahead and suppress it or if we're gonna let natural fire take its role back in the ecosystem. And just for an example, this is a picture of what we got going right now. The pink dotted lines are our pod lines. And so what we've done is we've incorporated, so that's Parley's at the top, and they're different colors based on whether it's mechanical, the type of treatment we've done. But we've kind of basically bolstered those pod lines and reinforced them, and we're gonna continue that all through Big and into Little Cottonwood, and eventually even tie it into some of the pod lines in Utah County. And then once we get all those lines, those fuel breaks kind of in place, then we're gonna start treating the broader polygons within those areas. And that's our strategic overall architectural framework for what we got going for next. And I'm gonna turn it over to Robby.
So when we talk about fuels work, a lot of times we're just focused on protecting infrastructure, whether it's water infrastructure or homes and life, right? But a lot of times we don't talk about the benefits of wildfire for wildlife, and it's more and more we're learning how important it is to have healthy ecosystems, to have wildfire on the landscape. The challenge along the Wasatch Front is we just can't do prescribed burns in a lot of areas, and so we have to use other methods like smaller scale prescribed burning, or even going in with hand crews and cutting, thinning out the trees and piling it and doing smaller burns. And another method we use is mastication in areas where you don't have too steep of slopes. We can go in with machinery, and this is a project we did in Parley's Canyon, just thinning out the oak brush. And a lot of times, I think the biggest message I want to share today, I think we've been trained to believe that, trees are the answer, and so many times I get questioned, why are you cutting down trees? Isn't that what wildlife needs? And really the key is biodiversity is the answer, right? And having diversity of landscapes and habitat types is the key. And so when we do these treatments, we're not going through and taking all the trees out. We're going through and making mosaics, or we're creating open meadows and creating that diversity of habitat. And the studies are really showing, we have now portable ultrasound devices that we use, and the Division of Wildlife, every year we're capturing hundreds, if not thousands, of large ungulates across the landscape, including along the Wasatch Front, from bighorn sheep, elk, and deer. And we study and we use ultrasounds to see their body fat, the amount of body fat they have, and their body condition. And we're able to detect changes between their condition before they go into the winter and their survival and how that impacts that. And we're really starting to find that high elevation summer ranges, so wildlife uses the whole landscape, right? So in the summertime, they're up on high elevations up by the ski resorts, and then as the snow comes in, they move down and they're out along the foothills in the wintertime. So we want to try to improve the habitat in all aspects of their ecosystem. And we've found that that's very critical to have high elevation summer ranges. So going in and doing these fuel treatments that mimic wildfire increases the understory vegetation. You have those open meadows, not just a wall of pine trees. We want diversity, and that creates more food. It helps the big game animals like deer and elk survive. But it's not just the animals. You know, I work for the Division of Wildlife. We care about animals that we can hunt, right? That's how we make our living. But we don't just care about those animals. We care about all wildlife. And these projects benefit every animal on the landscape, from birds to small mammals. And you have to think about, you know, we always think about old growth trees are important for, you know, for a lot of bird species and certain other species, but they also need those open meadows. A lot of times that's where they find their food. And this is a picture of a montane vole, and they need meadows and open habitat to survive and find their food. And then what eats those small mammals, right? You got the next level in the food chain. So we got to be thinking about biodiversity and kind of forget some of those old ways of thinking, and active management just has to be a part of that, and especially along these Wasatch Front ecosystems that have been altered by humans for so long and are impacted so heavily. So just want to talk about some other things that we're doing other than fuels work as well. We take a holistic approach. So you mentioned the Watershed Restoration Initiative. It's this amazing program, and I hope you can look into it more if you don't know more about it, but it brings lots of funding every year to allow us to treat the ecosystems at a holistic approach. And you may have seen some of these signs out there. We've been working with the county to treat myrtle spurge along the Wasatch Front. We do a lot of stream restoration work, building BDAs. We also are working to keep beavers on the landscape. Beavers are so important for having healthy ecosystems, and building these beaver deceivers helps us to keep beavers where we want them instead of having to remove them. We still remove a lot of beavers, and so we're trying to make that so we don't have to do that anymore. We're also actively catching beavers and relocating them, and we are starting that along the Wasatch Front as well. Here's a photo of where we built a BDA to build the habitat for a beaver, and then we let the beavers go, and this is an introduced beaver, and he's using that BDA and living there now. I have a video here. I don't know if it'll play. A cute beaver that we released. I just want to say we're doing so much work along the Wasatch Front from every aspect, like I said, from the high elevations down, and the fuels treatment is a key component of that, and we're doing lots of other things. We talked about native shrub planting is key, getting our foothills restored to native vegetation. Like I said, the animals move there in the wintertime, so we need to get healthy foothills, especially because we built homes right up against them. And then lastly, we're doing a lot of weed control, myrtle spurge, and we're making great progress in removing that. So. Yeah, thank you. Guess any questions, or do we have time for questions?
Yeah, I think we've got some time for questions if anyone has them.
I was just curious about the historic fire regime, what we know about the Cottonwood Canyons, and is that informed your fuels work?
Sure, yeah. For those that don't know, fire return interval is how often does fire historically come across the landscape. So for the Wasatch Front here, it's about 150 years. And so if anybody thinks back, when's the last time you saw a big fire on the Wasatch Front? So since the settlers got here, there has not been a large fire, and we know that through historical tree ring data. So there are still quite a few very old trees up in the canyons that we're able to core and pull those tree rings out, and we can see that about every 150 years or so, there's a big catastrophic fire that hits the canyons. We're well overdue. I'm actually pretty nervous, especially, I'm glad we've had 2 decent winters, but yeah, we're urgently trying to get some stuff done so that we can kind of mitigate some of that large catastrophic fire potential. The problem is it's very expensive work. It's about $1,500 to $2,000 per acre to treat this stuff, and so, you know, a 500 acre or 5,000 acre project is, you know, you're looking at about $10 million. So it costs a lot, but yeah, we definitely use the historical data to kind of drive the need and for the prioritization.
If I could just add a little bit to that too, because the question was also specific to the Cottonwood Canyons. And there was the Cottonwood Canyon forest, the forest in much of the upper Little Cottonwood and Big Cottonwood actually is restored from a previous time. So during the mid to late 1800s, a lot of that area had been mined and logged. And so there's also some homogeneous forest in that area that might increase the risk a little bit. I'm not a fire expert, but so I'm also looking to Stuart to maybe add on to that. But we have some unique conditions. Just the main point is we have unique conditions in the Cottonwood Canyons because of that history.
Yeah, there was Gifford Pinchot came in and the Salt Lake leadership asked him to help out, and yeah, his thing was to kind of pull the mining out, get the grazing off, and do some reforestation. So for those who are familiar with the Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, up around the Spruces area, that used to be a plantation, and there's even some larch up there that have been planted. They're not native, but they are now. So that's kind of where that comes from.
I think it was the fire above Deer Creek Reservoir and the aftermath that really clued me into the cost of fire to our water supply, and I just like for you all to comment on that in terms of lost water and also the treatment of the water.
So I don't know if everyone heard that, but I think Cindy's question is a really good one around, you know, we talk about what the cost might be to mitigate the fire risk, but the cost of a catastrophic fire in these watersheds could be much higher than that. And, you know, there are a lot of variables in there, but if you just think about like the disruption potentially in a large fire, the disruption of the access to the water that so many people depend upon, there's got to be a replacement cost with respect to the water to mitigate that disruption. Salt Lake City, we have billions of dollars worth of water infrastructure that is you know, made to fit those water resources. We have the treatment plants that treat Parley's Big Cottonwood and Little Cottonwood sources, as well as Little Cottonwood, which is operated by the Metropolitan Water District of Salt Lake and Sandy. We have reservoirs. So, I mean, it's very hard to estimate what the cost of a wildfire would be, but depending on the scale of it, it could be quite high.
Yeah, suppression costs alone for northern Utah average on these large fires average about $10,000 per acre just for the suppression costs. That doesn't include restoration, any other.
Just to add on to that, proactive management is almost always cheaper than reactive management. And I had a slide in there, let's cut for time, just on the impacts to recreation from wildfire. And as everyone knows, who I'm sure explores the Cottonwoods, that there'd be a huge component of recreational impact if catastrophic wildfire were to occur in the Cottonwoods.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing, but I have a question about the beetle kill that's going on in the woods. I happened to watch the top of the Poudre River in Colorado. I watched the trees die year after year, and then I was there when the fire started, and the whole thing burned, and that scares me for our woods.
So every year, the regional office does detection flights where they try and identify areas. This year, for example, they spotted what they thought was 3 trees in Mill Creek and about 40 trees in Big Cottonwood. They went out and ground truth. And yeah, the fire crew went out and cut up the 3 trees in Mill Creek. We actually just burned those piles yesterday. Once they got out to Big Cottonwood, there's actually a few more than 40. They have almost 60 trees. And unfortunately, they're clear up above Solitude, so we're a little late in the year to kind of get that project, get those trees cut and piled, but that's our priority in the spring is to get those cut and piled. And then we'll go back in the spring after the fly date and look for more and treat those trees as well. And then they're going to do additional flights next summer from the regional office.
So you cut them and then you burn them?
Yes, for the spruce beetle, yes.
It's the best you can do.
Yeah.
Well, isn't there a fir beetle that's getting some of the...
So there's, if I remember correctly, there's 5 different bugs that are kind of common up here. Some are kind of on the tail end of their havoc they've wrecked up here, and they're dying off. But we're trying to focus on the ones that are their populations are starting to build, so we don't have any problems, especially with the spruce. We're really trying to save the spruce.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I'll just say, I think that goes to what I was talking about, active management. Like if we just leave these forests alone, these outside invasive things we're gonna lose them. So we have to be proactive.
Thank you all. Let's give our panelists a final round of applause.